JFK International Airport hummed with the chaotic symphony of modern travel. Announcements echoed through the vast terminal, suitcase wheels clicked against polished floors, and harried travelers rushed in all directions like schools of determined fish. Among this sea of humanity moved Meryl Streep, her silver hair tucked beneath a simple navy blue cap, large sunglasses perched on her nose. Unlike many celebrities of her stature, she moved through the crowd without an entourage, pulling a modest carry-on behind her. 3-time Academy Award winner, 21-time nominee, and widely regarded as the greatest actress of her generation, yet here she was, waiting in line at the coffee kiosk like any other traveler. "Grande latte, please," she said with a warm smile to the barista, who did a slight double-take as recognition dawned in her eyes. "Of course, Miss Streep," the young woman replied, her voice dropping to a respectful whisper. "It's an honor." Meryl waved away the comment with a gentle hand. "Oh, please, I'm just another traveler needing caffeine, and it's Meryl." This was how Meryl had always navigated fame, with a grounded humility that endeared her to both colleagues and fans. The stories of her kindness were legendary in Hollywood, but she never sought recognition for them. She simply believed that treating people with dignity was the minimum requirement for moving through the world. As she collected her coffee, she felt the familiar buzz of her phone. It was her assistant, confirming details for the London ceremony, where she would receive a Lifetime Achievement Award tomorrow night. Meryl sighed softly. The accolade still made her uncomfortable, even after all these years. In her mind, she was still that young woman from New Jersey who just loved to tell stories. Today's flight was different from her usual routine. Normally, Meryl flew business class, comfortable but not ostentatious. She didn't believe in unnecessary extravagance. But today she carried a first-class ticket in her handbag, a gift from an old friend who insisted she deserved something special for this particular journey. "How you're accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award, for heaven's sake," her friend had said. "Just this once, let yourself be pampered." Meryl had relented, though not without protest. Now, as she made her way toward the first-class check-in counter, she felt slightly self-conscious. The exclusive line was populated by sleek executives and the occasional celebrity who, unlike Meryl, seemed to revel in the special treatment. An elderly man dropped his passport in line ahead of her, and Meryl immediately bent to retrieve it, passing it back with a kind smile. He thanked her, not recognizing her beneath the cap and glasses. These small human interactions were what kept her centered amid the often unreal world of Hollywood. The terminal's massive windows revealed planes taxiing on the tarmac, their massive forms graceful despite their size. Meryl watched them for a moment, thinking about the strange life she'd led, from community theater to becoming one of the most recognized faces in the world. Sometimes it still didn't seem real. Her thoughts were interrupted by a small voice beside her. "Excuse me," said a girl of about 12, clutching a worn paperback. "Are you Meryl Streep?" Meryl smiled and knelt slightly to meet the girl's eye level. "I am. What's your name?" "Sophie." "I want to be an actress someday. My mom and I watch your movies together." "Well, Sophie, that's wonderful. Where are you headed today?" As Sophie explained their family trip to visit grandparents in Chicago, Meryl noticed the girl's mother hanging back, giving her daughter this moment. Meryl appreciated the respect. When they finally said goodbye, Meryl signed Sophie's book with a personal message of encouragement. "Thank you for being so kind to her," Sophie's mother said quietly. "She's been rehearsing what to say to you for the past 20 minutes. "She's delightful," Meryl replied genuinely, "and very poised." These encounters kept her grounded. In an industry that constantly tried to separate stars from ordinary people, Meryl had always refused the distinction. People were people, each with their own rich inner lives and struggles. As she approached the first-class check-in area, she glanced at her watch. Still plenty of time before boarding. The line was shorter here, the carpet a touch more plush, the lighting a bit more flattering. Meryl adjusted her cap, feeling somewhat out of place despite her decades in the spotlight. She thought about the award waiting for her in London. Lifetime Achievement. It sounded so final, as though her story was complete. But Meryl didn't feel finished, not by a long shot. There were still so many characters waiting to be brought to life, so many stories to tell. The thought of retirement had never appealed to her. Her work wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. The first-class lounge entrance loomed ahead, staffed by a blonde woman whose crisp uniform and perfect posture projected authority. Something about her demeanor, the slightly lifted chin, the appraising gaze, suggested someone who took her position very seriously. Meryl reached into her bag for her ticket. The heavy cardstock felt foreign in her hands. Her usual tickets were digital or standard paper. This one, gifted by her friend Eleanor, was clearly premium, with gold embossing, and the airline's exclusive first-class insignia. "Next, please," called the blonde woman, her eyes already moving past Meryl to assess the travelers behind her. Meryl stepped forward, slipping her sunglasses to the top of her head. The cap still shadowed her face somewhat, but she never assumed people would recognize her. In fact, she often preferred when they didn't. "Good afternoon," Meryl said pleasantly, handing over her passport and the embossed ticket. "London Flight 345. The woman, her name tag read Vanessa, took the documents. With perfectly manicured fingers." She glanced at Meryl, then at the passport, then at the first-class ticket with a slight narrowing of her eyes. "First class?" she asked, her tone suggesting she found this unlikely. "Yes," Meryl replied simply. "A gift from a friend." Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly as she examined the ticket more closely. Something in her expression shifted, a flash of suspicion crossing her features. "One moment, please," she said coolly, holding the ticket up to the light as though checking for a watermark. Meryl waited patiently, untroubled. After decades in the public eye, she'd developed a certain equanimity about these small moments of friction. Behind her, other travelers had begun to queue, their expensive luggage and tailored clothes, marking them as frequent first-class flyers. "Is there a problem?" Meryl asked gently, when Vanessa continued to scrutinize the ticket. Vanessa's eyes flicked up, taking in Meryl's simple attire, the well-worn jeans, comfortable sweater, and unpretentious cap. Not the typical first-class passenger uniform of designer labels and statement accessories. "This ticket," Vanessa said with a slight edge to her voice, "where exactly did you get it?" The terminal continued its busy hum around them, but something in Vanessa's tone created a small pocket of tension. Meryl remained relaxed, her hands folded calmly before her. What came next would certainly be interesting. "I asked where you got this ticket," Vanessa repeated, her voice sharpening as she tapped one perfectly manicured nail against the golden embossed cardstock. Meryl's expression remained pleasant, though a slight crease appeared between her brows. "As I mentioned, it was a gift from a friend. Eleanor Richards." Vanessa's lips thinned into a tight line. "Eleanor Richards," she echoed with unmistakable skepticism. "You expect me to believe you personally know Eleanor Richards?" A businessman behind Meryl shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the brewing confrontation. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes widening as he caught a clearer glimpse of Meryl's face beneath her cap. "I've known Eleanor for many years," Meryl replied evenly. "We met during a charity event in the 90s. Vanessa's laugh was short and sharp. "Right. And I'm having lunch with Beyoncé tomorrow." She held the ticket higher, examining it under the bright terminal lights. "These premium tickets aren't just handed out as gifts. They cost thousands of dollars." Meryl sighed softly, her patience intact but wearing slightly thin. "I understand how it might seem unusual, but I assure you the ticket is legitimate. If you'd like to verify—" "Oh, I'm verifying all right," Vanessa interrupted, turning to her computer terminal and typing rapidly. She squinted at the screen, then back at Meryl. "There's no record of this specific ticket number in our system." By now, a small crowd had begun to form. The line behind Meryl had grown, with several passengers whispering among themselves. Young man had discreetly taken out his phone, pointing it in their direction. "Perhaps you could call your supervisor," Meryl suggested quietly, conscious of the attention they were attracting. Vanessa's face flushed slightly. "I don't need a supervisor. To identify a counterfeit ticket." Her voice had risen, carrying across the first-class check-in area. "Do you know how many people try to scam their way into first class? We have protocols." A younger airline employee working the adjacent counter glanced over nervously. "Vanessa," he said under his breath, "maybe you should double-check the premium. Reservation list. I know how to do my job, Daniel, Vanessa snapped without looking at him. Her attention remained fixed on Meryl, who stood calmly before her, hands folded in front of her. Ma'am, Vanessa continued with exaggerated patience, this ticket appears to be fraudulent. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside and purchase a legitimate ticket, or I'll be forced to call security. The businessman behind Meryl could no longer contain himself. Excuse me, he interjected, but do you know who you're speaking to? That's Meryl Streep. Vanessa's gaze flicked dismissively over the man before returning to Meryl. I don't care if she's the Queen of England. Rules are rules. More phones had appeared in the growing audience. The tension in the air was palpable, like the charged atmosphere before a storm. Meryl removed her cap, her silver hair catching the light. Without the shadow across her face, her identity was unmistakable. Mrs. Streep, Daniel said from the next counter, recognition dawning in his wide eyes. I'm so sorry about this confusion. Let me help sort it out. Vanessa turned to her colleague with a withering glare. Stay out of this, Daniel. She turned back to Meryl, seemingly unimpressed by her celebrity. Famous or not, this ticket isn't valid. Meryl's voice remained steady. I understand you're doing your job, but perhaps we could resolve this without creating a scene. Could you please check with Eleanor Richards directly? She's the... Enough about Eleanor Richards. Vanessa's patience had clearly reached its limit. Do you think dropping names will get you special treatment? This ticket is not in our system, which means it's not valid. Before Meryl could respond, Vanessa did something that sent gasps rippling through the gathered crowd. She took the beautiful embossed ticket between her fingers and deliberately tore it in half. The sound of tearing cardstock seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. There, Vanessa said with cold satisfaction. Now, if you'd like to purchase a legitimate ticket, I'd be happy to assist you. Otherwise, please step aside for passengers with valid documentation. Meryl stared at the torn pieces of the ticket now resting on the counter, genuine surprise, registering on her normally composed face. In all her years of travel, through all the airports of the world, she had never experienced anything quite like this. That was completely unnecessary, she said quietly. The crowd had grown considerably. Phones were recording openly now, and whispers had become murmurs of disbelief. Did she just rip up Meryl Streep's ticket? Oh my God, this is going viral for sure. Someone's getting fired today. Daniel had gone pale at the adjacent counter. He fumbled for a phone, his hands shaking slightly as he dialed an internal number. Sir, he whispered urgently into the receiver. We have a situation at first-class check-in. Vanessa just tore up Meryl Streep's ticket. Yes, the Meryl Streep. Vanessa, becoming aware of the spectacle she'd created, straightened her spine and lifted her chin defiantly. I'm simply enforcing company policy. Celebrity status doesn't exempt anyone from the rules. A distinguished older woman in the crowd spoke up. Young lady, I've been flying first class for 20 years, and I've never seen an employee destroy a passenger's ticket. That's outrageous behavior. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Meryl, however, remained remarkably composed. She had faced far worse in her life than an overzealous airline employee. May I speak with your supervisor? Meryl asked calmly. Vanessa's mouth opened to refuse, but she was interrupted by the arrival of a senior flight attendant hurrying toward them, alarm evident on her face. What on earth is happening here? The senior attendant asked, looking between Vanessa and Meryl. Vanessa gestured to the torn ticket. This woman tried to use a fraudulent first-class ticket. I handled it according to protocol. The senior attendant's eyes widened as she recognized Meryl. Miss Streep, oh my goodness! She turned to Vanessa with horror. What have you done? Her ticket wasn't in the system, Vanessa insisted, though a flicker of uncertainty had begun to creep into her expression. Before the senior attendant could respond, a commanding voice cut through the terminal, silencing even the background. Announcements of departing flights. Excuse me, but what exactly did you just do to my guest? The crowd parted as a tall, elegant woman in her 60s approached the counter. Her tailored suit exuded authority. Her silver-streaked dark hair swept back in a perfect chignon. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Vanessa's face drained of color as she recognized the newcomer. Everyone in. The airline knew that face. It appeared in the company newsletter, on the website, in the training videos. Miss Richards," Vanessa stammered. Eleanor Richards, founder and CEO of Atlantic Continental Airways, stopped beside Meryl, placing a gentle hand on her friend's shoulder. "Meryl," she said warmly, "I see you've experienced our famous customer service firsthand." The terminal fell into a hushed silence. Eleanor Richards' presence commanded attention without effort, a quality she shared with Meryl. The two women stood side by side, a study in dignified composure amid the chaos Vanessa had created. Vanessa's complexion had gone from flushed to ghostly. Her hand trembled slightly as she gestured to the torn ticket on the counter. "Ms. Richards, I was just following protocol for suspected fraudulent tickets." Eleanor's gaze moved from Vanessa to the destroyed ticket, then back to Vanessa with a coolness that made several onlookers wince in sympathy. "Protocol," Eleanor repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. "Our protocol involves verifying, not destroying. Especially not tickets I personally issued." The whispers from the crowd intensified. "She's so fired. This is better than a movie." "Did she say she personally issued the ticket?" Vanessa's throat worked as she swallowed hard. "Personally issued?" "But it didn't appear in our system." Eleanor reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather portfolio. From it, she produced a business card that she slid across the counter. "Perhaps you should check again. My direct line if you need to verify." The younger employee, Daniel, who had tried to intervene earlier, stepped forward. "Ms. Richards, I did try to suggest a more thorough check. The premium reservation system sometimes has delays syncing with the main database." Eleanor nodded appreciatively at Daniel before turning her attention back to Vanessa. "Now, would you kindly explain why you felt authorized to destroy Ms. Streep's ticket instead of escalating the matter to your supervisor?" Vanessa's professional demeanor had completely crumbled. I didn't recognize—" "Whether you recognized Ms. Streep or not is irrelevant," Eleanor cut in. "This is how you treat any passenger with a concern." Meryl, ever gracious, placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's arm. "Eleanor, perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private." She nodded toward the crowd of passengers, many still recording the confrontation on their phones. Eleanor took a deep breath, visibly collecting herself. "You're right, as always, Meryl." She turned to the senior flight attendant, who stood frozen nearby. "Margaret, please escort Ms. Streep to the private lounge. I'll join shortly." As Margaret led Meryl away, Eleanor addressed Vanessa one more time. "Wait for me in the staff office. We'll discuss your employment status there." The crowd parted for Meryl and Margaret, many offering sympathetic smiles or whispered apologies for what she'd experienced. Ever professional, Meryl acknowledged them with quiet dignity. Only once they'd entered the secluded hallway leading to the premium lounge did Margaret speak. "Miss Streep, I cannot begin to express how mortified we are. In 20 years with this airline, I've never witnessed such appalling behavior from a staff member." Meryl waved away the apology. "We all have bad days. I'm sure there's more to the story." Margaret's eyes widened at Meryl's graciousness. "Still, to treat anyone that way, let alone someone of your stature." They reached the lounge, a haven of hushed luxury amid the airport's chaos. Margaret ushered Meryl to a private seating area and promised to return with refreshments. Left alone momentarily, Meryl gazed out the floor-to-ceiling windows at planes taking off against the clear blue sky. She thought about how quickly situations could escalate on movie sets in airports in life. Minutes later, Eleanor entered, her expression softening as she spotted Meryl. "Well," Eleanor said, taking the seat opposite her friend, "that wasn't exactly the welcome I had planned for you." Meryl smiled. "Dramatic entrances were always your specialty, not mine." The two women laughed, the tension of the past hour dissipating. They had known each other for decades, their friendship beginning long before Eleanor built her airline empire. "I'm Faye." "Sorry about your ticket," Eleanor said. "It's just paper," Meryl replied with a shrug. "Though I am curious why it wasn't in the system," Eleanor sighed. "It was a special reservation, part of our new premium program that hasn't fully integrated with the main booking system. Vanessa should have checked the VIP list, where your name was clearly noted." She paused. "Not that any of this excuses her behavior. What will happen to her? Honestly, Most executives in my position would fire her on the spot. Eleanor studied Meryl's expression. But I sense you'd prefer a different approach. Before Meryl could respond, Margaret returned with a tray of tea and informed them that a replacement ticket had been prepared, along with an upgraded suite on the aircraft. Once they were alone again, Eleanor leaned forward. You know, most people would be demanding that girl's job right now. Bitter, defensive, rude, Eleanor supplied. Unhappy, Meryl concluded. Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. This compassion was why she'd valued Meryl's friendship for so long. You remember why I sent you this ticket in the first place, don't you? Of course, Meryl replied. For Catherine's birthday. Eleanor nodded, her eyes growing distant with memory. 7 years ago. Catherine was turning 16, going through chemotherapy and convinced she wouldn't see 17. The doctors had tried everything. I remember, Meryl said quietly. What you may not know, Eleanor continued, is that the day you visited her, in the hospital, changed everything. After you left, Catherine told me she had to survive, because you'd promised to watch her first film when she became a director. Meryl smiled at the memory. She was sketching storyboards in her hospital bed. Extraordinary talent. She starts film school this fall, Eleanor said proudly. In London, actually. That's the real reason I wanted you on this flight. Catherine's meeting us at the airport. She doesn't know you'll be there. Tears welled in Meryl's eyes. Eleanor, that's wonderful. Their moment was interrupted by a soft knock. The door opened to reveal the senior flight attendant with a somber-looking Vanessa. Miss Richards, Margaret began. As requested. Eleanor nodded. Thank you, Margaret. Vanessa stood stiffly, her eyes fixed on the floor, hands clasped tightly. Before her. Vanessa, Eleanor said, her tone professional but not unkind. I believe you have something to say to Miss Streep. Vanessa raised her eyes, revealing a face streaked with tears despite obvious efforts to maintain composure. Ms. Streep, I am deeply sorry for my inexcusable behavior. I disrespected you, embarrassed the company, and violated our most basic service principles. Meryl studied the young woman, noting the red-rimmed eyes and slight tremor in her hands. This wasn't just fear of losing a job, there was genuine remorse there. Apology accepted, Meryl said simply. Vanessa blinked in surprise, clearly having expected a different response. Just like that? Would you prefer I make it more difficult? Meryl asked with the hint of a smile. No. I mean, thank you. Vanessa turned to Eleanor. Ms. Richards, I understand if you need to terminate my position. Eleanor glanced at Meryl, a silent question passing between them. Meryl gave an almost imperceptible nod. Termination isn't my only option, Vanessa. Eleanor said carefully. Though there will certainly be consequences. For the first time since the confrontation began, a flicker of hope crossed Vanessa's face. But first, Eleanor continued, I think we need to hear the whole story. Vanessa lowered herself into the chair Eleanor gestured toward, her movements stiff with tension. The private lounge, designed for the airline's most elite passengers, suddenly felt suffocating despite its spacious luxury. I've been with Atlantic Continental for 3 years, Vanessa began, her voice barely above a whisper. Started as a gate agent, worked my way up to premium services. She paused, swallowing hard. This job, it's everything to me. Eleanor nodded, her expression neutral but attentive. Go on. My mother is sick, Vanessa continued, the words coming faster now. Parkinson's, I'm her only caregiver. The medical bills... She stopped, composing herself. The health insurance from this job is the only reason she can get treatment. Meryl's eyes softened with understanding. Vanessa wasn't making excuses, merely providing context. Last week I was informed my performance review was below standard. Too many customer complaints about my attitude. I was placed on probation. Vanessa's hands twisted together in her lap. One more incident and I'd lose my position. So today, I was determined to do everything by the book. When I saw a ticket that didn't register properly in our system, you overcompensated, Eleanor finished for her. Vanessa nodded miserably. I thought I was protecting the company from fraud. Instead, I created this disaster. Her eyes lifted to meet Meryl's. I truly didn't recognize you at first, Ms. Streep. Not that it should matter. I should never have treated any passenger that way. A contemplative silence filled the room. Outside the lounge's frosted glass doors, the airport continued its relentless rhythm, oblivious to the drama unfolding within. Meryl was the first to speak. "Thank you for your honesty, Vanessa." Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze intent. "Why didn't you mention your mother's condition during your performance reviews? We have family support programs, flexible scheduling for caregivers." Vanessa's surprise was evident. "I didn't want to seem like I was making excuses or asking for special treatment." "It's not special treatment to acknowledge human circumstances," Eleanor replied, a hint of frustration in her voice. "This company was built on understanding that our employees have lives beyond these walls." Margaret, who had remained by the door, cleared her throat softly. "Ms. Richards, the boarding process for Flight 207 will begin in 40 minutes. Eleanor nodded in acknowledgement before turning back to Vanessa. "Your situation doesn't excuse what happened today, but it does. Help me understand it better." Vanessa straightened her spine, resignation settling over her features. "I understand I've embarrassed the company. I'll clear out my locker immediately." "That won't be necessary," Eleanor said, surprising everyone in the room. "At least, not permanently." Vanessa blinked, confusion replacing resignation. "You're suspended for 2 weeks," Eleanor continued, her tone firm but not unkind. "During that time, you'll participate in our customer service intensive program. Your salary will continue, and your benefits remain intact." Relief flooded Vanessa's face, followed quickly by disbelief. "After what I did, why would you give me another chance?" Eleanor glanced at Meryl, a silent communication passing between them. "Because we all deserve one, especially when we're carrying burdens others can't." "Say," tears welled in Vanessa's eyes, but she blinked them back, maintaining her composure. "Thank you, Ms. Richards. I won't disappoint you." "I'm not the one you should be thanking," Eleanor replied, nodding toward Meryl. Vanessa turned to Meryl, genuine emotion breaking through her professional veneer. "Ms. Streep, I can't begin to express how sorry I am. You have every right to demand my termination." Meryl shook her head gently. "What purpose would that serve? You made a mistake. An unfortunate, public mistake, but still just a mistake. Most celebrities would have made sure I never worked in this industry again," Vanessa said softly. A hint of amusement flickered in Meryl's eyes. "I've never much cared for doing what most celebrities would do." Eleanor rose from her seat, signaling the conversation was drawing to a close. "Margaret will escort you to HR to process the suspension paperwork." Her tone softened slightly. "And Vanessa? We'll have someone from our family assistance program contact you about your mother. There are resources you should be aware of." After Vanessa and Margaret departed, Eleanor turned to Meryl with a sigh that melted into a small smile. "You influenced my decision, you know. The old Eleanor would have fired her on the spot. The old Eleanor wore shoulder pads and thought mobile phones were a passing fad," Meryl teased. "People change." The two friends shared a laugh, the tension of the past hour dissolving between them. "Come," Eleanor said, gesturing toward the door. "Let's get you checked in properly, and I insist on upgrading your accommodations. The owner's suite is yours for this flight." Meryl followed Eleanor through the hushed elegance of the premium lounge toward a private check-in area reserved for the airline's most exclusive passengers. As they walked, fellow travelers recognized them, some nodding respectfully, others failing to hide their curious glances. "You do realize," Meryl said quietly, "that everything that happened out there is probably all over social media by now." Eleanor groaned softly. "Our PR team is likely having collective heart failure." "Airline executive staff rips up Meryl Streep's ticket" isn't exactly the headline we strive for. "It could be worse," Meryl offered. "Remember that airline that dragged a passenger off an overbooked flight? At least no one physically removed me from the premises." "Your ability to find silver linings is remarkable," Eleanor replied dryly. They reached the private check-in desk, where a poised young man immediately stood at attention. "Ms. Richards, Ms. Streep, everything is prepared for your flight. We've arranged for priority boarding through the private entrance." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Thank you, James." As James processed Meryl's new documentation, a notification chimed on Eleanor's phone. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from concern to surprise, and then to wry amusement. "What is it?" Meryl asked. Eleanor showed her the screen, displaying a social media post that was rapidly gaining traction. Someone had captured the moment Eleanor had confronted Vanessa, with Meryl standing calmly beside her. The caption read, "When you mess with Meryl Streep and find out her best friend owns the airline. My career-ending moves, my queen, Meryl, more epic fail." Meryl shook her head, but couldn't suppress a small smile. "The internet does love its drama." "Speaking of drama," Eleanor said, pocketing her phone, "I just received word that Catherine's flight from London was delayed. She won't be meeting us at the gate as planned." "A shame," Meryl replied. "I was looking forward to seeing her." "Oh, she'll still be at the award ceremony tomorrow night, and she'll be absolutely stunned to see you there." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "She idolizes you, you know. Keeps a signed photo from that hospital visit on her desk even now." James handed Meryl her new boarding pass, an elegantly embossed card similar to the one Vanessa had destroyed, but with "Owner's Suite" printed in discreet gold lettering. "Your legacy isn't just your films, Meryl," Eleanor said softly as they moved toward the private boarding area. "It's the lives you've touched along the way, like Catherine's, and perhaps after today even Vanessa's." Meryl accepted the compliment with characteristic grace. "We all leave ripples, Eleanor. Some of us just have a more public splash." As they approached the exclusive jetway, a thought occurred to Meryl. What will happen to Vanessa after her suspension? Will other staff know about her situation? "The details remain confidential," Eleanor assured her, "but I think it's safe to say that Vanessa has learned a valuable lesson today, one that no training manual could ever teach." Meryl nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most important lessons come from our most public mistakes." "Indeed," Eleanor agreed. "And speaking of public, are you ready to board before the social media storm truly hits?" Meryl's eyes crinkled with amusement. "After decades in Hollywood, a little internet buzz is hardly intimidating. Besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "I've survived much worse reviews than Chart's airport drama." Together, the two friends walked toward the waiting aircraft, leaving behind the chaos of the terminal for the peaceful luxury that awaited them above the clouds. The owner's suite on Atlantic Continental's flagship Boeing 787 was a marvel of understated luxury. Unlike the ostentatious first-class cabins of some airlines, Eleanor had designed this space with elegant simplicity, soft cream leather, polished walnut accents, and discreet lighting that could be adjusted to any preference. The suite occupied the forward section of the aircraft, offering complete privacy and a dedicated flight attendant. Meryl settled into the plush seat as the other passengers boarded, grateful for the momentary solitude. The events at the terminal had been more draining than she'd let on. Though she'd navigated far worse publicity storms during her career, there was always something disconcerting about being at the center of public spectacle when you weren't playing a role. "Comfortable?" Eleanor asked, slipping into the companion seat across from Meryl. As the airline's owner, she often flew with specially selected guests, using the time to build relationships far from office interruptions. "It's lovely," Meryl replied, running, her fingers along the butter-soft armrest. "Though you know I would have been perfectly content in business class," Eleanor waved away the comment. "After that ordeal, you deserve some pampering. Besides, I've been looking forward to catching up properly. It's been, 2 years since we had more than a hurried lunch." "Catherine's graduation," Meryl recalled. "You were so proud you practically floated through the ceremony." Eleanor's eyes softened at the memory. With good reason. The doctors had given her a 30% chance of reaching that milestone. A discreet knock interrupted them, as the suite's dedicated attendant, a serene woman in her 50s named Claire, entered with 2 crystal flutes of champagne. "Ms. Richards, Miss Streep, will be departing in approximately 20 minutes. The captain asked me to extend his personal welcome." "Thank you, Claire," Eleanor replied. As Claire withdrew, closing the suite's door behind her, Meryl raised her glass. "Two survivors." "Two survivors," Eleanor echoed. They clinked glasses gently, the crystal producing a perfect, clear tone. Outside, The suite's window ground crew scurried about in their final preparations. Meryl watched them, thinking about all the invisible workers who made each journey possible, the mechanics, the baggage handlers, the cleaning crews. So much like the film industry, where audiences only saw the finished product, never the hundreds of hands that crafted it. "I saw your last film," Eleanor commented, following Meryl's gaze toward the window. "The one about the Supreme Court Justice. Extraordinary work." "Thank you," Meryl said simply. After decades of accolades, she'd learned to accept compliments, with grace rather than deflection, though praise still made her slightly uncomfortable. "You've never rested on your laurels," Eleanor observed. "That's what I've always admired about you. 3 Oscars, 21 nominations, and you still approach each role like it's your first big break." Meryl smiled. "Acting keeps me honest. Every new character is a chance to discover something I didn't know about the world, or myself." The aircraft began its pushback from the gate, the gentle rumble of engines vibrating through the cabin. Eleanor settled more comfortably into her seat, kicking off her Louboutins with a small sigh of relief. "Speaking of discovering things," she said, reaching for a slim portfolio in her handbag, "I did some digging into Vanessa's situation after our meeting. Her personnel file is illuminating." Eleanor passed several documents to Meryl. Employee records showed an exemplary first. 2 years. Commendations, perfect attendance, glowing customer feedback. Then abruptly a decline. Lateness. Complaints about her cold demeanor. A written warning. Her mother's diagnosis came 18 months ago, Eleanor explained. Vanessa became her primary caregiver almost overnight. No siblings to share the burden, father long out of the picture. Meryl studied the papers thoughtfully. A classic case of caregiver burnout. She's what, 28? That's a heavy responsibility at any age. 27, Eleanor confirmed, and attending night classes for a business degree, at least until recently. She tapped a finger against one document. She dropped out last semester. I suspect her mother's condition worsened. The aircraft taxied toward the runway, its massive form powerful yet graceful. Meryl returned the documents, her mind on the young woman whose career had nearly ended that day. "What will you do about her?" "Beyond the 2-week suspension, I mean." Eleanor's expression became thoughtful. "I'm considering creating a position for her in our employee assistance department once she completes the customer service training. Someone who's walked through fire can guide others through the smoke." "That's remarkably compassionate. I learned from the best," Eleanor replied with a meaningful glance at Meryl. "Your visit to Catherine changed our family's perspective forever. She stopped being a cancer patient that day and became a future filmmaker again. Hope is a powerful medicine." The plane accelerated down the runway, pressing them gently back into their seats as it lifted into the afternoon sky. Beneath them, New York City receded, its sprawling geometry transforming into a glittering miniature. "I've been thinking," Meryl said as they leveled off, clouds drifting past their window, "about tomorrow's ceremony." "Your Lifetime Achievement Award," Eleanor nodded. "Well-deserved if long overdue. I'd like to invite Vanessa." Eleanor's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's unexpected, is it?" Meryl tilted her head thoughtfully. "The theme of the ceremony is cinema as a bridge between worlds. What better opportunity to demonstrate that principle in action?" A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. "You never cease to amaze me, Meryl Streep. Most people would still be drafting angry tweets about their airport experience, and you're extending an olive branch." "Not an olive branch," Meryl corrected. "An opportunity. For Vanessa to see beyond the uniform, beyond the celebrity, to recognize our shared humanity." The fasten seatbelt sign chimed off, and Claire returned with a light meal of smoked salmon canapés and fresh fruit. As she arranged the food on the small walnut table between them, Meryl noticed something in the attendant's demeanor, a mixture of efficiency and personal warmth that made passengers feel genuinely cared for rather than merely served. "Thank ye. How you, Claire?" Meryl said warmly. "Everything looks wonderful." Claire's professional composure softened slightly. "It's an honor to serve you, Ms. Streep. My daughter and I watch The Devil Wears Prada every Mother's Day. It's our tradition." After Claire departed, Eleanor chuckled. "You see, that's the difference. Claire shared a personal connection without making it about herself. That's what Vanessa needs to learn, the human touch that transforms service into connection. Perhaps seeing the inner workings of this world we've built, Meryl mused, gesturing to encompass the luxury suite, the aircraft, the sky beyond, will help her understand that true hospitality comes from genuine care, not rigid rules. Their conversation flowed easily as the Atlantic Ocean appeared below them, a vast expanse of deep blue stretching to the horizon. They spoke of Catherine's film school ambitions, Eleanor's expansion plans for the airline, Meryl's upcoming projects. Two accomplished women in their respective fields, comfortable in their achievements yet never complacent. As the flight progressed, Meryl found herself gazing out the window, watching the interplay of light and shadow on the clouds below. Tomorrow, she would receive an award celebrating her life's work, yet she felt nowhere near finished. There were still stories to tell, characters to embody, bridges to build between disparate worlds. And perhaps, she thought with quiet resolve, one young woman's perspective to change along the way. 4 hours into the transatlantic flight, a gentle hush had settled over the aircraft. In the main cabin, passengers dozed beneath thin blankets or watched movies on personal screens, their faces illuminated by the soft blue glow. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles, their movements practiced and efficient. In the owner's suite, Meryl sat at the small walnut desk, pen in hand, staring thoughtfully at the cream-colored stationery embossed with the Atlantic Continental logo. Eleanor had excused herself to review some company documents, leaving Meryl alone with her thoughts. The blank page before her represented a decision, a choice between allowing today's incident to fade into memory or transforming it into something meaningful. Meryl had always believed that true power lay not in one's ability to punish, but in the capacity to understand and connect. She began to write, her elegant script flowing across the page. Dear Vanessa, I wanted to reach out personally following our encounter at JFK today. While our meeting was certainly unexpected, I believe there are no accidents in this life, only opportunities for growth and connection that we might otherwise miss. Meryl paused, considering her next words carefully. She didn't want to sound condescending or preachy, yet she felt compelled to reach past the awkwardness of their first meeting. I understand from Eleanor that you're facing significant personal challenges while maintaining your professional responsibilities. That balancing act is one I recognize well. Though our circumstances differ greatly, the weight of caring for a loved one while trying to build your own future is one of the heaviest burdens to bear, and one that's rarely visible to those we encounter daily. Tomorrow evening, I'll be receiving an award at the British Film Institute. The ceremony celebrates stories that bridge different worlds and experiences, something I've dedicated my career to exploring. I'd like to invite you to attend as my guest. This isn't about making amends or public reconciliation. Rather, it's an opportunity to step outside our usual roles and connect as people, rather than as airline employee and passenger. Sometimes seeing a different world helps us navigate our own with fresh perspective. The invitation stands regardless of your decision about Atlantic Continental. I've enclosed my contact information should you wish to accept. With warm regards, Meryl Streep. She read over the note, made a small correction, then folded it carefully and slipped it into an envelope. After writing Vanessa's name on the front, she sat back, wondering if she was overstepping. Perhaps the young woman wanted nothing more than to forget this entire episode. A gentle knock at the suite door interrupted her thoughts. Claire entered with a fresh pot of herbal tea. I thought you might like some chamomile, Ms. Streep. We'll be beginning our descent in about 2 hours. Thank you, Claire. Meryl hesitated, then held out the envelope. I wonder if I might ask a favor. Could you arrange for this note to be delivered to Vanessa Lawrence? She's an employee who was working at the first-class check-in earlier today. If Claire was surprised by the request, her professional demeanor revealed nothing. Of course, Ms. Streep. I'll ensure it reaches her directly. After Claire departed, Meryl turned her attention to the darkening sky outside her window. The Atlantic stretched endlessly below, reminding her of a scene from her third film. A young actress then, still discovering her craft, playing a woman crossing the ocean to begin a new life. How many journeys had she embarked on since, both literal and figurative? Her mind drifted to her early days in New York, long before the accolades and recognition. She remembered the cramped apartment she'd shared with two other aspiring actresses, all of them working odd jobs between auditions, waitressing, dog-walking, envelope stuffing, whatever paid the rent. There had been a particularly difficult period when her father had fallen ill. She'd been offered a promising role in a regional theatre production, but family responsibility had called her home instead. For 3 months, she'd helped care for him, putting her ambitions temporarily aside. The casting director had been unsympathetic, informing her curtly that opportunities couldn't wait for personal problems. Perhaps that's why Vanessa's situation resonated so deeply. Meryl understood the impossible choices that caregivers faced daily, the constant juggling of responsibilities, the fear that taking time for yourself meant failing someone who depended on you. The suite door opened again as Eleanor returned, looking refreshed despite the long flight. "Working on your acceptance speech?" she asked, noticing the stationery on the desk. "Actually, I wrote a note to Vanessa," Meryl replied. "I've invited her to the ceremony tomorrow." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's remarkably generous, even for you." Meryl shrugged. It felt right. There's something about her situation that reminds me of my early years, that crushing pressure to succeed professionally while managing personal obligations. "The difference being that you managed it with grace," Eleanor pointed out, while Vanessa ripped up a first-class ticket and created a social media spectacle. "We all handled pressure differently," Meryl said softly, "and we didn't all have the support systems I was fortunate enough to have." Eleanor's expression softened as she settled into her seat. "You know, when Catherine was sick, you were one of the few people who didn't treat her like she was made of glass. You spoke to her about her future, her dreams, not her illness." "Because that's who she was," Meryl replied. "A young woman with aspirations, not just a collection of symptoms and medical reports." "That's what I'm trying to see in Vanessa," she continued. "Not just an employee who made a mistake, but a person dealing with challenges we can only glimpse." The aircraft encountered a patch of mild turbulence, causing the cabin to shudder slightly. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, reassuring passengers that they were simply passing through an area of unstable air and would soon reach smoother conditions. "A fitting metaphor," Eleanor remarked when the announcement concluded. "We all encounter turbulence. The question is how we navigate through it." In the main cabin, several rows behind the owner's suite, Vanessa sat rigidly in her economy seat. As a staff member flying standby, she'd been fortunate to get a seat at all, especially after the day's events. She stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with the other flight attendants, several of whom had already heard about the incident through the airline's efficient grapevine. Despite the personal turmoil swirling within her, Vanessa maintained her professional composure. Years of training had taught her to compartmentalize, to keep her emotions tightly contained behind a mask of efficient detachment. It was a skill that had served her well professionally, if not personally. What she couldn't know was that a note was making its way toward her, an unexpected gesture that would offer a bridge across the chasm she'd inadvertently created. Or that in London, plans were already in motion that would transform what had begun as her worst professional mistake into an opportunity for profound change. As the plane continued its journey eastward, day was already breaking over London. The city awakened, unaware that among its imminent arrivals were 3 women whose chance encounter would ripple outward in ways none of them could fully anticipate. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. The captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened." The announcement broke through the cabin's quiet hum as the aircraft shuddered, encountering a pocket of rough air. Drinks trembled in plastic cups, overhead bins creaked, and a collective tension rippled through the passengers. In the owner's suite, Meryl gripped her armrest lightly. After decades of international travel, turbulence rarely bothered her. Eleanor, too, remained composed, though she set aside her tablet to brace against the increasingly pronounced bumps. "Nothing to worry about," she assured Meryl. "Just the jet stream being temperamental." The plane dipped suddenly, eliciting gasps from the main cabin. A cart rattled somewhere, followed by the sound of something, likely a drink, spilling. Claire's voice came through the suite's intercom. "Ms. Richards, Ms. Streep, please remain seated. We're deviating slightly from our course to find smoother." "Herr, this should pass within 15 minutes. "Acknowledged," Eleanor replied. The turbulence intensified, the aircraft now bucking like a small boat on choppy seas. A sharp jolt sent one of Meryl's scripts sliding from the side table onto the floor. As she leaned to retrieve it, the suite's door opened unexpectedly. Vanessa stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame for stability, the other clutching a silver tray with what appeared to be medical supplies. Her face registered shock at finding herself face to face with both Meryl and Eleanor. I'm sorry," she stammered. "Claire asked me to deliver these while she helps with a passenger in business class. I didn't realize you were both—" "It's fine," Eleanor interrupted. "Please come in before you lose your balance." Vanessa entered, carefully setting the tray on the table. "Pain relievers, antacids, and ginger tea for motion sickness," she explained, her professional demeanor returning despite her obvious discomfort at the situation. As she turned to leave, another violent shake of the aircraft sent her stumbling. Sideways, Meryl instinctively reached out, steadying the young woman. "Perhaps you should sit until this passes," she suggested, gesturing to the empty seat opposite them. Vanessa hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and practicality. A particularly rough jolt made the decision for her, as she quickly slipped into the offered seat, fastening the seatbelt with practiced efficiency. An awkward silence descended, punctuated by the creaking of the aircraft as it fought its way through the turbulent air. Vanessa stared at her hands folded tightly in her lap, her discomfort palpable. "I received your note," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise. Meryl nodded, giving her an encouraging smile. "And? I don't understand why you'd want me there." Vanessa looked up, genuine confusion in her eyes. "After what I did, why would you extend such an invitation?" The plane shuddered again, but the physical turbulence now seemed secondary to the emotional current running through the suite. "Sometimes," Meryl said thoughtfully, "the most meaningful connections begin in the most unlikely places." Vanessa shook her head slightly. "But I humiliated you, publicly." "You made a mistake," Meryl corrected gently. "One that I suspect doesn't reflect who you truly are." "How could you possibly know who I truly am?" There was no defiance in the question, only genuine bewilderment. Meryl considered her response carefully. "I don't, not fully. But I recognize the look of someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear alone. I've seen it often enough in the mirror." Something in Vanessa's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "Ms. Richards told you about my mother." "She mentioned your situation," Meryl confirmed. "It resonated with me. Years ago, I was struggling to establish my career when my father became ill. I nearly gave up acting to care for him." "What happened?" Vanessa asked, momentarily forgetting her embarrassment. "I found a balance, eventually. Not perfectly, not without sacrifice. But I learned that self-destruction doesn't serve those we love." Meryl paused. "Your mother wouldn't want you to lose yourself in caring for her." Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes, but she blinked them back, professional pride still holding firm. "The airline is my security," she said quietly. "Without it, without the health insurance—" She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. Eleanor, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. "Vanessa, Atlantic Continental values loyalty. You've been an exemplary employee for most of your time with us. One incident, however unfortunate, doesn't erase that history." "But I violated basic protocol," Vanessa said, her voice tight with emotion. "I embarrassed the company." "Yes," Eleanor agreed candidly, "and there are consequences for that. But destroying a promising career isn't one of them, at least not in my company." The aircraft began to steady, the violent jolts subsiding to gentle rocking. The intercom chimed softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've navigated through the turbulent air and should have smooth flying for the remainder of our journey. The captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign, but we recommend keeping your seatbelts loosely fastened when seated." The metaphor wasn't lost on any of them. "My mother was diagnosed 18 months ago," Vanessa said suddenly, as if the calming of the external turbulence had freed something within her. "Early onset Parkinson's. The doctors say her case is progressing unusually quickly." Meryl listened, attentively, recognizing the importance of allowing Vanessa this moment to be seen not as an employee who had erred, but as a daughter facing an impossible situation. I moved her into my apartment, took on extra shifts for the overtime, dropped out of my MBA program. Vanessa swallowed hard. Every day I watch her lose another piece of herself, and every day I feel like I'm failing her somehow. Caregiving is perhaps the most difficult role anyone can play, Meryl said softly, especially when you're trying to maintain your own identity alongside it. Vanessa looked up, surprise registering in her eyes. That's exactly it. I feel like I'm disappearing, becoming just an extension of her needs, just a function. Which might explain, Eleanor suggested gently, why you've become so rigid about rules and protocols at work. When everything else is chaotic, structure provides a sense of control. The insight landed visibly on Vanessa, her eyes widening, slightly with recognition. I never thought of it that way. The invitation to tomorrow's ceremony stands, Meryl said, bringing the conversation back to where it had begun. Not out of pity or some public gesture of reconciliation, but because I think we might have more in common than today's unfortunate beginning would suggest. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, considering. I don't have anything suitable to wear to such an event, she said finally, the practicality of the concern so unexpected that Meryl couldn't help but smile. I think we can solve that particular problem, Eleanor interjected. Atlantic Continental keeps a selection of formal attire at our London office for staff attending official functions. I'm sure we can find something appropriate. The plane continued its smooth journey eastward as the conversation flowed more naturally now, the initial awkwardness dissolved by shared vulnerability. Vanessa spoke of her hopes for her mother's treatment, her postponed education, her childhood, dream of starting her own business someday. Meryl and Eleanor listened, occasionally sharing their own experiences with balancing personal challenges and professional demands. None of them mentioned the torn ticket or the social media storm it had unleashed. That moment, which had seemed so defining just hours ago, had receded in importance, becoming merely the catalyst that had brought three unlikely companions together on this journey across the Atlantic. When Claire returned to check on them, she found the three women engaged in conversation so natural and flowing that she hesitated to interrupt. The turbulence, it seemed, had passed in more ways than one. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our final descent into London Heathrow. Local time is 6:43 a.m. and the temperature is a brisk 12 degrees Celsius. We'll be landing in approximately 20 minutes. The captain's announcement roused passengers from their transatlantic slumber. Window shades lifted, revealing the misty English countryside below, patchworked in shades of emerald and jade. The first golden rays of sunrise illuminated the aircraft's wing as it banked gently toward its destination. In the owner's suite, Meryl gathered her belongings with practiced efficiency. After countless international flights, she had streamlined the process to an art form. Kindle into handbag, scarf around neck, reading glasses in case, small cosmetic bag for a quick refresh before landing. Eleanor watched her with amusement. You make deplaning look like a choreographed dance. Years of practice, Meryl replied with a small smile. There's a rhythm to travel once you find it. Their conversation with Vanessa had concluded an hour earlier, when Claire had returned to prepare the suite for landing. Vanessa had returned to her economy seat, but not before accepting Meryl's invitation to the ceremony, tentatively, as if still uncertain of its sincerity. What do you think? Meryl asked, stowing her cashmere throw in her carry-on. About Vanessa? Eleanor considered the question thoughtfully. I think she's drowning in responsibility and doesn't know how to ask for help. Pride, fear, stubbornness, probably a combination. Sounds familiar, Meryl observed. You weren't exactly quick to accept assistance when Catherine was ill. Touché, Eleanor conceded, though I like to think I was never quite so prickly. You had your moments, Meryl teased gently. Remember the hospital benefit when that well-meaning socialite suggested a healing crystal regimen for Catherine? Eleanor groaned at the memory. I may have been slightly harsh. You suggested she could put her crystals somewhere the sun doesn't shine. Like I said, slightly harsh. They shared a laugh as the aircraft descended through a layer of clouds, the sprawling expanse of London coming into view below. The Thames wound its sinuous path through the city, bridges straddling its width like carefully placed stitches. "Do you think she'll actually come tonight?" Eleanor asked, returning to the subject of Vanessa. "I hope so," Meryl replied. "There's something about her, beneath the rigid exterior, a resilience." The aircraft touched down with a gentle bump, its engines roaring in reverse thrust as it decelerated along the runway. Outside the window, the familiar landscape of Heathrow materialized, service vehicles scurrying about, other aircraft being guided to their gates, the efficient machinery of international travel in constant motion. "Ms. Richards, Ms. Streep," Claire announced as she entered the suite. "We've arranged for priority deplaning through the forward exit. Your car is waiting at the diplomatic terminal." "Thank you, Claire," Eleanor responded. "You've been wonderful." As they prepared to leave, Meryl paused. "Claire, could you relay a message to Vanessa Lawrence? Please let her know that a car will be waiting for her at 6 this evening at her hotel to bring her to the ceremony." "Of course, Mrs. Streep," Claire replied, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "And, if I may say so, it's been an honor serving you today." The aircraft reached its gate, the subtle shift in the engine's tone signaling their journey's end. Outside, a sleek black Mercedes waited on the tarmac, a discreet distance from the usual procession of shuttle buses and service vehicles. "Perks of owning the airline," Eleanor said with a wink as they descended the private steps directly to the waiting car. What neither of them expected, however, was the small contingent of photographers stationed near the diplomatic terminal. As Meryl and Eleanor approached the car, camera flashes erupted, momentarily blinding in the early morning light. "Ms. Streep, over here. Eleanor, comment on the JFK incident." "Meryl, how do you feel about the airline's response?" The driver quickly opened the car door, shielding them as they slipped inside. Once settled in the vehicle's quiet interior, Eleanor turned to Meryl with a grimace. "I apologize for that. Our PR team warned me there might be some press interest after the social media storm, but I didn't expect paparazzi at 7 a.m. Meryl waved away the concern. "Hardly the most aggressive press encounter I've faced. Besides, by tomorrow it will be old news." As their car pulled away from the terminal, navigating through Heathrow's complex roadways toward central London, Eleanor checked her phone. Her expression shifted from annoyance to resignation. "What is it?" Meryl asked. Eleanor handed over her phone, displaying a tabloid headline that had just gone live. "Ticket trauma. Airline staff tears up Meryl Streep's ticket. Owner steps in." Beneath it was a surprisingly clear photo of their confrontation with Vanessa, clearly taken by a passenger. "The internet works quickly," Meryl observed, handing back the phone. "Our PR team is drafting a statement," Eleanor said, typing rapidly. "Something bland about an unfortunate misunderstanding that has been resolved amicably." Meryl gazed out the window at the passing scenery, London awakening to a new day. "Perhaps this is an opportunity rather than a crisis." Eleanor looked up from her phone. "How so?" "Every story needs context," Meryl replied. "Right now, it's just privileged celebrity versus airline worker. What if we reframe it?" "I'm listening." Atlantic. Continental announces a new employee assistance program for staff serving as caregivers, inspired by a chance encounter between airline staff and a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Eleanor's eyes lit with understanding. Turning a potential PR disaster into a corporate responsibility initiative. Brilliant. More importantly, Meryl added, it could genuinely help people like Vanessa, caught between professional responsibilities and personal caregiving. Their car merged onto the M4 heading toward London. Morning commuter traffic was building, but their lane moved steadily eastward. Meryl found herself thinking about Vanessa, likely now navigating the regular passenger terminals, unaware that her story might soon inspire corporate policy. "I've made a decision," Eleanor announced suddenly, setting down her phone. "I'm promoting Daniel, the young man who tried to intervene yesterday, to a supervisory position. His instincts were correct, and he showed courage in a difficult situation." "And Vanessa?" Meryl inquired. "Depends on how she handles the next." "Few days," Eleanor replied. "I believe in second chances, but they must be earned." Their car turned onto a quieter street, lined with elegant Georgian buildings, approaching the Savoy where Meryl would be staying. Morning mist still clung to the trees along the Thames embankment, giving the scene a dreamlike quality. "Will Catherine be meeting us at the hotel?" Meryl asked as they pulled up to the discreet side entrance. "No, I've arranged for her to surprise you at the ceremony tonight. She still has no idea you're here." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with anticipation. Her flight from Paris landed an hour ago. As they stepped from the car, the hotel's deputy manager greeted them warmly, orchestrating the seamless transition of luggage with practiced efficiency. No mention was made of airport incidents or social media controversies. Here, Meryl was simply a valued guest, returning to a familiar haven. In the grand lobby, with its Art Deco elegance and polished marble floors, Meryl paused. "What time should I expect you this evening?" "I'll send a car at 7, Eleanor replied. "The ceremony begins at 8. They embraced briefly before Eleanor departed for her company's London headquarters, leaving Meryl to settle into her suite. As the elevator ascended, Meryl found herself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had begun with a torn ticket at JFK. Sometimes, she thought, the most meaningful connections emerge from moments of conflict, when masks slip and real humanity emerges from beneath carefully maintained facades. Tonight would reveal whether the connection forged in turbulence could flourish on solid ground. The British Film Institute's Royal Gala sparkled with the controlled elegance that only London could master. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the historic venue where cinema royalty mingled with actual royalty. Women in couture gowns and men in impeccable tuxedos navigated the grand hall, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter creating a gentle symphony beneath the classical quartet playing in the corner. In a private preparation room, Meryl stood before a full-length mirror, making final adjustments to her midnight blue gown. After decades of award ceremonies, she approached them with the calm confidence of a seasoned performer, though tonight felt different somehow. This wasn't just another accolade to add to an already impressive collection. It was a recognition of a life's work, of countless characters given voice through her remarkable talent. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. 15 minutes, Miss Streep, an assistant called. "Thank you," Meryl replied, reaching for the simple diamond earrings that completed her ensemble. Another knock followed almost immediately, more hesitant than the first. Meryl opened the door to find Vanessa standing uncertainly in the hallway, almost unrecognizable from the stern airline employee of yesterday. She wore a beautifully cut emerald dress, clearly from Eleanor's corporate collection, and her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. More striking than the physical transformation, however, was the change in her demeanor. The rigid posture and defensive expression had given way to something more vulnerable and genuine. "You came," Meryl said warmly, stepping back to invite her in. "I almost didn't," Vanessa admitted, her fingers nervously intertwining. "It still feels surreal, being here, after everything." "Life often takes unexpected turns," Meryl observed. "Some of my most treasured friendships began with misunderstandings." Vanessa smiled tentatively. "The car Eleanor sent came with a note explaining that Catherine would be here tonight. That's her daughter, right? The one you visited in the hospital?" Meryl nodded. 7 years ago, she was facing a difficult battle with remarkable courage. "Eleanor mentioned that your visit changed everything for them," Vanessa said. "That afterward, Catherine found a new determination to fight her illness. Sometimes all we need is someone who sees beyond our current circumstances to who we might become," Meryl replied, thinking not only of Catherine but of the young woman before her. The conversation paused as Meryl's stylist entered briefly to hand her a small clutch purse and depart just as quickly. Outside they could hear the increasing buzz of arrivals, the ceremony's commencement drawing near. "I should find my seat," Vanessa said, moving toward the door. "Actually," Meryl replied, "I was hoping you might walk in with me." Vanessa's eyes widened. "With you? But won't people recognize me from the photos? The airline incident is all over the internet." "Precisely," Meryl said with a gentle smile. "Let's give them a different ending to the story." Before Vanessa could respond, there was another knock at the door. Eleanor entered, resplendent in a tailored burgundy gown, her expression brightening at the sight of Vanessa. "You came," she said, echoing Meryl's earlier greeting. "And you look wonderful." "Thank you for arranging everything," Vanessa replied. "The dress, the car." "Consider it part of your professional development," Eleanor said with a wink. "Speaking of which, Catherine is waiting in the main hall. She still has no idea you're here, Meryl. I can't wait to see her face." The three women made their way through the elegant corridors toward the ceremony's grand entrance. As they approached, the buzz of conversation grew louder, punctuated by camera flashes and the controlled chaos of a major industry event. Vanessa hesitated at the threshold, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "Perhaps I should enter separately," she whispered. "I don't want to embarrass you." Meryl took her hand gently but firmly. "You're not an embarrassment, Vanessa. You're a reminder that we're all more than our worst moments." With that, they stepped into the brilliantly lit hall. The effect was immediate. Conversations faltered as heads turned. Recognition dawned on faces throughout the room, not just of Meryl, the evening's honoree, but of the young woman beside her who had been featured in viral photos just hours earlier. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Isn't that the airline employee? The one who tore up her ticket? What are they doing together?" Photographers surged forward, capturing what promised to be the evening's most unexpected images. Meryl navigated the attention with practiced grace, keeping Vanessa close beside her as they moved through the crowd. From across the room, a young woman with striking dark hair and Eleanor's unmistakable eyes stared in open astonishment. Catherine Richards pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling as she recognized Meryl. Eleanor moved swiftly to her daughter's side, whispering something that made Catherine's expression shift from surprise to profound emotion. The room seemed to part as Catherine approached, no longer the ailing teenager Meryl had met years ago, but a vibrant young woman on the cusp of her own artistic journey. "Miss Streep," she breathed, extending her hands. "I had no idea you would be here." Meryl took Catherine's hands in hers, genuinely moved by the transformation before her. "Your mother is full of surprises, and please, it's Meryl. You probably don't remember, but you visited me in the hospital when I was 16, Catherine began. "I remember perfectly," Meryl interrupted gently. "You were working on storyboards for a film about a girl who could step into paintings. You had extraordinary vision even then." Catherine's eyes widened. "You remember that?" Of course, artists recognize each other. Around them, the crowd had begun migrating toward the ceremony hall, the evening's official program about to begin. An assistant approached discreetly, informing Meryl that she would be introduced in approximately 5 minutes. Eleanor turned to Vanessa. "Your seat is in our private box. Catherine will show you the way." As Catherine led Vanessa toward the box, Meryl noticed their immediate, easy rapport. Two young women from different worlds finding unexpected connection. Eleanor watched them go, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You've created quite a stir," she commented to Meryl. "Social media is already exploding with photos of you and Vanessa arriving together." "Good," Meryl replied. "Let them see that reconciliation is possible, that human connection transcends a momentary conflict." Always teaching, even without words, Eleanor observed with affection. The ceremony began with all the pomp such occasions command: stirring music, elegant introductions, retrospective montages of cinematic achievements. Through it all, Meryl sat with characteristic poise, genuinely moved by the celebration of an art form that had defined her life. When the time came for her to accept the Lifetime Achievement Award, she ascended the steps to the stage amid thunderous applause. Standing at the podium, the golden statuette gleaming beneath the lights, she gazed out at the assembled guests. In the private box, she could see Eleanor and Catherine, and beside them, Vanessa, the unlikely catalyst for what had become a journey of unexpected connections. Meryl smiled, set aside her prepared remarks, and began to speak from the heart. 1 year later, JFK International Airport hummed with its usual chaotic energy. Travelers rushed through terminals, announcements echoed overhead, and harried parents corralled excited children. Amid this familiar symphony of modern travel, Meryl Streep moved with unhurried grace, her silver hair tucked beneath a simple cap, dark sunglasses shielding her eyes from recognition. So much had changed in a year, yet the airport remained eternally the same, a crossroads of humanity, where thousands of individual journeys intersected daily before diverging towards separate destinations. Meryl approached the first-class check-in counter for Atlantic Continental Airways, a sense of déjà vu washing over her. The memory of her last departure from this terminal had faded from public consciousness. Yesterday's viral sensation long since replaced by newer controversies, but for those directly involved, the ripples continued to spread. Behind the counter stood a familiar face, though transformed in subtle ways. Vanessa Lawrence's blonde hair was styled in a professional bob, her Atlantic Continental uniform now accessorized with a senior trainer pin. Her posture remained straight, her movements efficient, but the brittle edge that had once defined her demeanor had softened into something more authentically confident. "Good morning, Mrs. Streep," Vanessa greeted her with a warm smile of recognition. "It's wonderful to see you again." "Vanessa," Meryl replied with genuine pleasure, "Eleanor mentioned you might be here today. I requested this shift specifically," Vanessa admitted. "When I saw your name on the passenger manifest, it seemed appropriate." Around them, the terminal bustled with activity. Other travelers oblivious to the quiet reunion taking place. Vanessa processed Meryl's documents with professional efficiency while maintaining casual conversation. "How is your mother?" Meryl inquired. Gentle smile softened Vanessa's features. "Much better, thank you. The new treatment protocol is showing promising results, and the home care assistance has been life-changing for both of us." "I'm so glad to hear that." "And your latest film?" Vanessa asked. "I saw it last weekend. Extraordinary work." "Thank you," Meryl replied simply, long accustomed to receiving compliments with grace rather than deflection. As Vanessa returned Meryl's passport and boarding pass, she hesitated briefly. "I never properly thanked you," she said, her voice lowering slightly. "What you did a year ago, inviting me to the ceremony, walking in with me, it changed everything." Before Meryl could respond, a young airline employee approached, clearly nervous to be interrupting. "Excuse me, Miss Lawrence. The new training group is assembled in Conference Room B. Thank you, Ryan. Please tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." Vanessa turned back to Meryl. "My new role," she explained. "After the incident last year, Eleanor created a position for me, customer experience trainer with a focus on empathy and recognition." "It suits you," Meryl observed. "We actually use your story as a case study now," Vanessa continued, with a hint of embarrassment. "Though we've changed the names to protect the guilty." They shared a laugh, the past transformed from wound to wisdom. "Ms. Streep," came a familiar voice as Eleanor Richards approached, elegant as ever in a tailored suit. Perfect timing. The two friends embraced warmly. "I thought you were in Tokyo," Meryl said. "Returned yesterday." "I wouldn't miss this," Eleanor replied cryptically before turning to Vanessa. "How are the preparations coming along?" "Everything's ready," Vanessa confirmed. "The trainees are quite nervous about the demonstration." Meryl glanced between them, sensing a planned surprise. "What demonstration?" Eleanor's eyes sparkled with mischief. "We've made some changes since your last visit. Perhaps you'd indulge us with a small detour before your flight." Curious, Meryl allowed herself to be guided away from the check-in counter toward a corridor marked Atlantic Continental Training Facilities. Eleanor swiped a security card, leading them into a section of the terminal usually hidden from passenger view. "After what happened last year," Eleanor explained as they walked, "I realized we needed a fundamental shift in our approach to customer service. The old model was too focused on procedures and not enough on people." They passed several glass-walled classrooms where airline staff engaged in various training exercises. In one room, employees practiced baggage handling techniques. In another, they simulated emergency procedures. "We developed an entirely new training program," Eleanor continued. "We call it the Streep Standard." Meryl raised an eyebrow. "You named a training program after me." "After what you represent," Eleanor clarified. "The ability to see beyond surface appearances to the humanity beneath." They stopped outside a large conference room where approximately 20 Atlantic Continental employees sat in a semicircle, listening attentively to a presentation. At the front of the room stood Catherine, her dark hair swept back in a professional chignon, gesturing toward a projection screen. "Catherine designed our training videos," Eleanor explained proudly. Her film school project evolved into a full-time position with our corporate communications team. Through the glass, Meryl could see the screen displaying an artistic interpretation of her encounter with Vanessa. Not a literal reenactment, but a thoughtfully crafted scenario demonstrating how compassion could transform conflict into connection. May we? Eleanor gestured toward the door. Inside, Catherine paused mid-sentence as they entered, her professional demeanor momentarily slipping as she recognized Meryl. The trainees turned in their seats, eyes widening as they realized who had joined them. "Everyone," Vanessa announced, stepping to the front of the room. "We have a special guest today. Many of you have been studying the case that inspired our new approach to customer experience. This is Ms. Meryl Streep, who taught us that behind every difficult interaction is a human story waiting to be acknowledged." The room erupted in applause as Meryl moved forward, genuinely touched by the unexpected tribute. Catherine embraced her warmly before addressing the group again. "The Streep standard isn't about celebrity treatment," she explained. "It's about recognizing that every passenger carries invisible burdens and personal stories that shape their experience. Our job is to see beyond the transaction to the person." For the next 20 minutes, Meryl observed as the trainees role-played challenging customer scenarios, applying principles derived from her encounter with Vanessa. What had begun as an unfortunate incident had evolved into a philosophy that was transforming an entire corporate culture. Afterward, as they walked Meryl to the private lounge, Eleanor shared the program's impressive results. Complaint rates down 30%, employee satisfaction up 45%, and customer loyalty metrics at an all-time high. "All because someone ripped up my ticket," Meryl mused with gentle humor. "All because you responded with grace, rather than indignation," Eleanor corrected. They paused at the entrance to the first-class lounge, their journey together coming full circle. Vanessa, who had accompanied them, checked her watch. "I should return to my training group," she said. "My mother is looking forward to your new film, Ms. Streep. She's become quite the cinephile during her recovery." "Please give her my best," Meryl replied. "And Vanessa, I'm proud of what you've accomplished." After Vanessa departed, Eleanor turned to Meryl with a thoughtful expression. "You know, most people would have leveraged that incident for personal gain, demanded firings, sought compensation, milked the publicity. You chose to see it as an opportunity for connection instead." "We're all more than our worst moments," Meryl said simply. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of that truth." As Meryl settled into the lounge to await her flight, she reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a torn ticket. In her decades-long career, she had portrayed countless characters navigating life's complexities, but sometimes the most profound stories were the ones that unfolded when the cameras weren't rolling. Stories of ordinary people finding grace in unexpected places. Through the lounge's vast windows, she watched an Atlantic Continental aircraft lift into the clear blue sky, carrying hundreds of passengers toward destinations unknown. Each person aboard carried their own invisible burdens and private joys, their individual stories briefly intersecting before continuing along separate paths. That was the beauty of human connection, Meryl thought, how a single moment of genuine recognition could ripple outward in ways no one could fully anticipate, transforming not just individual lives, but entire systems. Not through grand gestures or public declarations, but through the simple, powerful act of seeing one another clearly, even in our most difficult moments. The ordinary magic of being truly seen. Perhaps that was the greatest role she had ever played.